Hi guys, I'm Claire. Welcome to my first video. I've been a Booktube lurker for the past few months, and yeah, I thought I would make a video. Give it a shot. I'm like trying really hard to look at the camera instead of at my own face. We'll see how this goes. So I thought that the best way to maybe just dive in a little bit, test the waters, would be to talk about some books that I read recently because of Booktube. So here we go. Okay, the very first book I ever read based on Booktube recommendations was, surprise, surprise, The Essex Serpent, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen around. This just came out in the US. Oh, I guess I should hold it up. If you don't already know, this is historical fiction that's set in the later 1800s in Essex in England, and it follows a woman named Cora who moves from London after the death of her abusive husband to a smaller fictional town, and she becomes friends with people in the town, specifically with the local reverend, curate, parson, I think that's it. But she becomes friends with Will Ransom, who is the parson, and there's sort of this hubbub going on in town. Everyone's in kind of hysterics because there is this supposed Essex serpent that is bringing sort of bad luck on the town. People are disappearing, or their goats are disappearing, but kind of follows the developing friendship and intellectual relationship between Cora, who is very interested in science and fossils and sort of finding the Essex serpent, and Will, who's a man of faith who thinks that the Essex serpent is just kind of a load of malarkey. It also follows a bunch of the people in town. I thought it was really beautifully written, very readable. At times I thought that the most interesting characters to me were really Cora and Will, and sometimes splitting off into the other characters sort of stretched the narrative to the point that all of the storylines were interesting, but none of them really had the meat that I wanted. I don't know how much depth there was to it. I don't know if you could go in and really pick it apart besides sort of the surface level delightfulness. But it was great. I'm not great extemp, but maybe we'll get there someday. Subscribe, stay tuned. The next book that I read because of Booktube recommendations was another book with a beautiful cover. It was Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. So if you don't know, Idaho is set in Idaho. That's a state in the US next to Washington. So Idaho basically follows a woman named Anne who is married to a man named Wade. And the book opens about 9 years after a terrible tragedy happened to Wade with his first wife and his 2 young daughters. This isn't a spoiler. Anne and Wade have now been married for several years after the events happened. And it's kind of Anne trying to piece together this horrible thing that's happened, while Wade is suffering from an illness. He is slowly losing his memory and kind of losing himself. This book is so beautifully written. It's really incredible. It's so beautifully written to the point that you can almost feel the labor in it. I read an interview with the author where she talked about how she went through and really reworked it on a sentence by sentence level, and you can tell while you're reading. This book is so beautiful but also so polished. It's not just every sentence, it's every serif on every letter of every word is just so perfectly crafted, to the point that I think it takes the emotional energy out of it a little bit. That being said, most of this book takes place in quiet moments after this horrible thing has happened. It also has some flashbacks to moments before from different characters' perspectives. Most of the book is very quiet. If you're interested in plot, this is not for you. Halfway through the book, I was kind of like, where is this going? I would encourage you to kind of like push on through it, because I do think it's a really lovely book. I think the character of Wade is so beautifully rendered that your heart just like aches for him. If anything, this book is a very, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's like a very tactile book. It's like you can feel the world. It is so evocative of that place. They live on this really remote mountain in Idaho, and the space that these characters inhabit felt so immediate and so real. And I think that's the real strength of this book. If you're someone who's a fan of beautiful writing, exquisite language, and imagery, this is definitely a book you should check out. And the last book that I read because of Booktube, The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. The Tidal Zone follows this middle-class family living outside London in the Midlands. It is narrated by Adam, who's a stay-at-home dad, to a 15-year-old daughter, Miriam, also known as Mimi, and then Rose, who's like 8. Basically, the book opens on Miriam collapsing on a school playing field, her heart stopping, and her being like technically, clinically dead for a couple of minutes, and kind of the repercussions that has on this sort of average English family. I think that the book's main strength is its really realistically rendered characters. The dialogue is just like spot on. I think that what's really interesting about this book is realizing that horrible things and that death and loss aren't out of the ordinary, that eventually this happens to everyone. It's happening all the time, and you aren't aware of it until it happens to you, and it happens to your family. Throughout the book, Adam's kind of talking about, you know, like this, my whole world is collapsing. I don't know if my daughter is gonna like stop breathing at any moment, but at the same time, families in Syria are being bombed all the time. And their pain and suffering and loss isn't less or less painful just because it happens in that area more often. So I think that that kind of like contemplative consideration for what's going on in the world is really an interesting element of this book, and it also kind of like helps make what this family is going through seem very, very universal. And I think that's kind of like what the book is getting at. So yeah, I would recommend it, but not like, oh, I'm dying, you have to read it now. So I had to like take off that sweatshirt because I'm like sweating, you guys. This really worked me up. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, this was fun. We'll see how it goes. I'll fix it in post.